And if we can build something for a firefighter, right, with as rough as they are with their gear, with just how much as they just need to that building's on fire. I need to go in there and get it, and I can't spend time pressing buttons, right? So we can think about how to build technology as simply and robust, and then also use this battle-proven software, TAC, to build it. Yeah, it's this simplicity.
Welcome to the Closing Code podcast. Today, my guest is Alex Gorsuch. He's the co-founder and CTO of Ascent Integrated Technology. Alex, welcome to the podcast. Please introduce yourself and tell us more about the company and what you guys do.
Sure. Thanks for having me. First of all, I love kind of telling some of my war stories, and if it helps even one other person, learn from my mistakes, then it's time that is deeply, deeply valuable. But yeah, so I'm Alex, like I said, co-founder, CTO of Ascent. What we do is actually pretty simple, really, at the end of the day, in which we'll get into over the next bit of this podcast, but we do it in a pretty simple way. So we protect the health and provide the location of dismounted, meaning outside of a vehicle operator. So think law enforcement, special forces, firefighters, like when humans go into a crappy situation that is imminently dangerous to life and health, some kind of hazard, whether that's a fire, a bad guy with a gun, or whatever. We provide their location and how they're doing back to their command. Um, we've kind of iterated on multiple ways to solve it, but fundamentally, how we do it today is we put a specific watch on them, Samsung Galaxy smartwatches, and I'll get into at some point today why it's important that it's specifically Samsung. Um, but that provides their location and their heart rate and really simple heart rate alerts, right? Like if over 200 for more than 30 seconds, if under 30 for more than 30 seconds, push an alert, and that all goes over an Air Force built software. So while once upon a time we were building our own hardware, building our own software, and had 27 people on the team, now we've really learned the job to be done is connect this watch, which exists. This is a Samsung Galaxy Watch Ultra, to this beautiful Air Force made software, excuse me, called ATAC, the Android Tactical Assault Kit, and across the entire Tactical Assault Kit ecosystem of products. We didn't build that, but we just connected them. Because if we can use something that is, in ATAC's case, literally battle tested, built 15 years ago to not drop bombs on our friends, and just make it relevant, make it easy to use, make it easy to scale, then we solve the problem.
Beautiful. And I like how you used simple. And based on what you described, it sounds like a very simple value proposition. But I'm wondering in terms of positioning when you're thinking about getting the word out or educating the market or potential end users, how do you do that? Does it come across as simplistically as you've described here, or is there more education? Are there other competitors in the space that you might be compared against? What does that look like?
I mean, I wish that we were the only people in the world, connecting watches to tech, but we're not. There's or just really, if we even abstract it further from tech, right? Connect watches to maps fundamentally. Yeah, we're definitely not the only people to do it. Where our edge is, though, is that simplicity. Because I've spent quite a while understanding the needs of the operator in wearables. So, in addition to my day job, I'm also the committee chair of the International Association of Fire Chiefs Wearables Committee. So, looking at how we deploy wearables in that operational context, right? And if we can build something for a firefighter, right, with as rough as they are with their gear, with just how much as they just need to that building's on fire. I need to go in there and get it, and I can't spend time pressing buttons, right? So we can think about how to build technology as simply and robust, and then also use this battle-proven software, TAC, to build it. Yeah, it's this simplicity. It's the fact that you know it's not like, okay, go buy watches and then we'll put software on them, and then you have to get a server and we'll connect to the server. It's hey, fire chief, hey, USASOC team, hey, whatever, right? Insert customer archetype here. Hey, human that needs to know where your people are and protect them when they're in danger. Here's a number of watches. Here's a tablet. Turn them on. 30 seconds later, the watches all show up. We built it to just be that simple to where, again, departments, Air Force installations, whatever, insert customer here, they don't have to worry about, how do I buy my watches? How do I connect them to LTE? How do I get my tax server? It just works. That is by far and away our biggest value proposition. Right? There are others who have watches that, have a lot longer battery, like Garmin, because they do have on their Fenix 7X, for example, they have a solar panel. It's super cool tech. They have a solar panel built into the face of the watch so you can get more battery. There are others that go deeper into the physio. But our thing is that it just works. Just turn it on and abracadabra. It just shows up. And then how we really get the word out and kind of get those customer buy-in is we just give them the product. We basically say like, hey, here, have 4 to 12, depending on what their needs are, right? Have a number of watches, have a tablet. It's all pre-configured. It's ready to go. Try it for, 60 days, 90 days. Sometimes that's, right, putting on like their firefighter engines as they're traveling around the city, right? Seeing like, hey, I see you stopped at Arby's. What are you doing over there, buddy? Or, it's more like, larger like state fairs and other things of just try it. Just see the kind of difference it can make in situational awareness for your tactical teams. And we get a heck of a lot of buy-in because, we're giving first. And then two, often they'll come up with some, some feature requests. They'll say, oh, could it do blah, 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 blah. Sometimes it's, I don't know, sci-fi stuff, right? Where it's like, oh, well, could it sense this thing? And it's like, well, that watch doesn't have that hardware. Maybe one day, but often it's something really, really simple, right? Just like, hey, could you make it, instead of dropping this one type of point, it could drop these 4, which conforms to this NATO symbology. It's like, okay, sweet. Yep, we'll have that done in, a week and a half, 2.5 weeks.
That's amazing. And it's very rare that companies these days are like, try our tech for free. There's usually some sort of like paid pilot program. People are more inclined to like want the customer to have skin in the game in some way, and that's usually by paying. So this is a very unique approach, and I'm wondering, like, is that something you've always been doing? Is that something you've started doing more recently?
Mm.
What do you think has been the most, what do you think about this approach has been the most successful? Is it the giving part?
I think I think definitely the giving is a large part of it, right? Like, what I say to people is like, it's going to be easier for you to convince your funders, right? Because so between my first and second business, I taught a bunch of courses. One of them was National Science Foundation's I-Corps program, which is like, hey, you have cool tech. Who cares? Who's going to buy it? Who's the decision maker? Who's the purchaser? Who's the funder? Who's the user? Who's the customer? Like all this stuff, right? Often the decision maker. So if we look at like civilian fire, right? Most fire departments, there's a decision maker, big chief, like big fire chief, big mustache, 5 bugle, right? What you picture. They actually don't have as many mustaches as you'd think. It was a disappointment. There's the fire chief, right? And unless they're a fire protection district, which is like, small little towns where I grew up having FPD, most of them, they're not like, oh, I love it, and here's my budget. They're like, oh, I love it, and now I need to go to, my city council or some other governmental body to get that budget. What I always tell them is like, hey, it's going to be infinitely easier if you can walk into that meeting and say, hey, check this out. Look, I'm going to press a button here and a point's going to show up there. I'm going to call a fake alert, like as if one of our people was having, a heart condition, because that's the number one line of duty death killer of firefighters. It's far easier for them to just be like, hey, let me show you how this works, instead of like, gosh, these people from Chicago sure came in with a cool slide deck and showed some neat stuff. So that's part of it. If we give them the capacity to champion the technology on their own, I think the other part is it just like kind of brings them into the experience. Right? There's that old phrase, I don't remember who said it, but it was like, nobody wants to be sold to, but people want to buy in. I'm probably butchering the quote, but it's something along those lines. They don't want another vendor coming in and being like, oh, well, it's this much money, and if you want to turn it on, it's this. You want to connect it, it's this, because that is what happens in the public safety, specifically fire industry. But for someone to come in and champion technology with them and kind of shepherd them through like the technology change management piece. It's a big deal.
Yeah, definitely. When you were first getting the business going and looking to land your first few customers, what process did you take? Did you take the same approach? Like, had you ironed it out as eloquently as you just described it?
Definitely not. When we first started, I mean, it was, oh my gosh, everything was different. When we first started, right, we were building our own hardware, building our own software, which I alluded to, which just, looking back, right, it was the best decision we had with the information at the time. Now, it was a colossal, horrible mistake that wasted millions of dollars. But that being said, our business development strategy was also pretty different, right? People to sign these non-binding pre-order letters of, hey, yeah, I'll pay, a year to, monitor the health and location of my people, and here's where they are. Looking back, those letters, they sold like the future so much that it blinded the customer as well as like our own internal team members of the art of the possible today. So it's like a distraction, if that makes sense and answers your question.
Yeah, it does. So, how did you overcome that? Like, what was the next thing that you did when you're like, maybe this isn't going to be working? I mean, building your own software side after realizing like that's not the route to go. Like, how did you determine when to shift, and then what did that shift look like? Where did you start to focus instead?
Yeah. I want to make sure I understand the question. You're asking what made us decide to switch from, look at us, we're little unicorns who are going to build everything ourselves, to we're just going to be hyenas and just stitch together these things that exist. Okay, cool. Yeah, I should make sure I was addressing the question. Yeah. So great story. So we won this international competition for tracking first responders indoors. And it was this big NIST competition. We got 870K ish from winning it. And it was like an incredible achievement for the company. It really, like, at the time, right? We were like, we're on the path here. Like, there's basically $1 million to solve this problem. Ergo, it must be a big problem. And we won this competition with, it was like, I don't know, 150 or so companies from all over the world entered, and we won it. So we're like, okay, like, we're pretty cool. We're pretty cool people. Look at us. We understand the problem. We understand the tech. But we sold it. Not a lot, like to, 2 or 3 departments in the East Central Illinois, rural, where I'm originally from, and then here in Chicago, where we're located. Not Chicago FD, but like suburbs. And we sold it, and they were like, "Oh, this is so cool, right?" Because it worked. It was technologically very cool, right? Because it was even the beta was like an iPhone, in a very, very fire resistant case mounted on the SCBA, which would take this like LiDAR point scan of the environment, point cloud scan. As a consequence, right, it would create these like high fidelity maps of, their office, whatever. They thought it was neat. Like, I mean, it was fundamentally neat. It was really cool, but it wasn't something that could be operationally deployed. A few reasons. First, putting a big thing that's like huge, right? Because think of how big like an iPhone Plus or whatever the middle size, Max, whatever the biggest iPhone is, in a case that has to be fireproof. Like, that's a big piece of technology, right? So even just the ergonomics didn't work. But then too, they had to press a button, which sounds super minor, right? It sounds like, oh, well, if they're going into a burning building and they want to be rescued, who wouldn't press a button? Well, no one would press a button. And like I've seen this across industries. People are trying to deploy, hyper fancy tracking tech. The more stuff you have to do, particularly if the you in that question is like, the person running into the building, the 18-year-old with a rifle, whatever. Like, if they have to do more stuff to make the technology fundamentally do its job, they won't, because they don't care, because they have bigger issues on their mind. Maybe one day, right? Like, this technology will become so embedded they will, but like, not in the next 10 years, certainly not. So we saw this thing, right, where we won this big competition. It was like super accurate, super precise, right? And then we saw the accuracy just steadily drop down to zero. Now, what I don't mean is that, people would, whatever, like it started like drift occurring, although of course any indoor tracking technology has drift. What I mean is people stop pressing the button. It does not matter how cool the technology is, how it uses, LiDAR and point clouds and all these like fancy scientific stuff, if people don't use it. That was a huge wake-up call to us. Like, we spent millions of dollars building and then deploying that technology. And real firefighters, like people who spend their days running into burning buildings to save others, like they budgeted for it and they built SOPs around it and they trained with it, but they didn't use it. So we went back to the drawing board because we were like, this clearly isn't working, right? And there was some aspect of, oh, maybe if we'll make this change, and it was like very incremental, and it was like, if we don't radically change, we will die as a company. Everyone here is great, but unless we're all paid to hang out, we're not that good of friends, right? So we had to like really go back to the drawing board. And I had been aware of TAC, this tactical assault kit, or as it's called in the civilian world, team awareness kit. I'd been aware of it for a while. And it was always one of these things where, so at the time we had gotten 4.5 million in Air Force funding. And at the time, it was like, hey, yeah, you need to be on TAC eventually, right? Because that's the platform they use. They built it, our tax dollars paid for it, so they use it. So it's like, you need to be on TAC one day. And then we were like, well, it's clear building our own software for a number of reasons, some of which was implementation, some of which is just, we were a small team. It just wasn't working. So we rebuilt everything to take Samsung phones in the pocket of the bunker gear to track, to put them on TAC, and there was definitely great reception to that. People were like, great. I didn't like pressing a button, hence I didn't. Now I don't press a button. That's great. There were still some issues, right? The exact same issues, by the way, that the Air Force has with deploying TAC for their own people, for their own airmen and airwomen. A phone to track you, unless you need it, right? Most users of TAC, they're like SOCOM stuff, because that's where it started. They wear it here, they have a map, and they can, go, oh, yep, that's a good guy, that's a bad guy, drop the bomb there. Unless you need a map, a phone is a really overcomplicated solution to that problem. So then Samsung came out with this ability to have standalone stuff, these standalone, right? So these watches, unlike your typical smartwatches, they don't have to pair to your phone. It's just a direct LTE in here that just goes direct to the cloud, direct to TAC server. So then we started doing that. We started iterating it, started building, started involving, the warfighter early on with our development, various police departments, various fire departments. And it's been great. It's been much better received because, you'll forget this. You'll leave this in the pocket of your whatever. You'll leave it charging in the truck. It just won't work, right? You'll play games on it and drain the battery, and you'll watch YouTube, whatever, right? You'll find ways to use it. But this, you're not going to forget your wrist. And because of how we've built it, we've like locked everything. So it's very much like it only does WearTac. That's our software, right? WearTac. It only does that. So you can't do anything else, right? You can't just start, I don't know, watching on YouTube. You can't do crazy stuff with it. So
Hmm.
battery life's crazy good, all kinds of cool stuff. But that was a huge learning experience for the company, right? Despite that was my problem in my first company of I'm going to build everything. Look how smart I am. And then I taught that for 5 years, right? I taught some Army Research Lab stuff. I taught hacking for defense. I taught the National Science Foundation course. Everything focused around like, the tech is irrelevant. All that matters is the problem. Build to the problem, not your tech. I still fell into that same trap for the first 2, 3 years ish of the business because it's very insidious. Everybody wants to be the big hero building the big technology, right? And they want to, come out of the gate swinging. They want to raise a huge amount of money. They want to be the next. This might not be the most PC reference anymore, but I can't think of a better one. Elon Musk, right? They want to be the big tech dude. But it's like, solve the problem. No one cares, right? The 18-year-old with a rifle, the 20-year-old smoke jumper jumping out of a plane with a chainsaw to fight a wildfire. He doesn't care how many patents we have. They don't care what our evaluation is. They don't care about any of that. They just care about like, will this allow me to get in or jump out of the plane, do my job, and get
Yeah.
home safe to my family? That is their only concern. And we have to build to that, not our hubris.
Yeah, that's so important. Focusing on the problem, delivering the solution for that specific problem, making it as easy as possible for your end user, your customer, to use your tech. So yeah, you've been through a lot. That was, I can imagine, a huge learning experience. But it sounds like you've come out stronger on the other side. And I'm wondering, what was that like? Like re-educating existing customers, looking to new customers, saying, "Hey, like we've shifted, we've pivoted. Like maybe you didn't want to press a button before, now you don't have to." What was that like? Like what channels did you use to educate, to get the word out? Who did you share it with first?
Yeah, so we started with smaller customers. Fundamentally, I would love to say like, yeah, all of them, they handled the change, they loved it. A fair amount didn't. On the DoD side, they loved it because we switched to TAC, we switched to, what's called NEOP, basically a certification thing that the NSA does. This is NEOP compliant, basically meaning it meets cybersecurity standards. Like we were like, hey, this is software you use. Hey, this is hardware that you're allowed to use. Isn't it great? They loved it. And that's where I concentrate my non-technical time is the like DoD, NATO, et cetera, business development and sales. But for like public safety, particularly fire, who historically we've done most of our work with, and historically too, for most of them, we're like, we're going to tell you, sub 1 meter accuracy where exactly your people are. Look, we won this big competition, blah 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 blah. A fair amount of them didn't. A fair amount of them were just like, well, this isn't what I was sold. And they're, certainly not like detractors or certainly not, enemies or whatever. They're not like, gosh, I hate those Ascent people so much. But they certainly ain't champions. And that's okay. Right. Like I would love to say that they all are like, this is even better. Most of them did, even the ones that have been there since the beginning, because they were like, you know what, this is something I can use. The stuff you were showing me before but couldn't use. Also back when we were building our own software, it was like, I don't know, 8 times more expensive. Right? So that's a big consideration. But that being said, except for some of those people, just the thing that they were sold of, we're a firefighter company and we're going to tell you exactly, precisely, super duper, sub 1 meter actually where your people are. They got sold that vision and they got sold that vision incredibly well. And maybe they'll never adjust. We just have to accept that.
Are they still on the old tech, or did you
Uh,
completely deprecate that?
Yeah, it's completely deprecated. I've got about $70,000 sitting in that room of fireproof iPhone cases if you'd like one, because they're sitting there doing nothing. But no, we shut down that server. We shut down everything because it cost a lot and people just weren't using it. And two, like when people saw the cool technology, like the point cloud specifically, firefighters would, walk around and they, map their space and they'd be like, oh, look at your beer gut. I can see it on the camera. Fell in love with the cool thing, the shiny object, not the boring thing. If we take this and we connect it to this Air Force software.
You mentioned a couple different segments there: firefighters or first responders, public safety officials, military, more defense type personas. Do you do anything in like with civilians? Are there use cases for civilians?
I mean, I would think so. Yeah. I mean, like hiking and stuff.
Hmm.
When I was in my very, very early 20s, I was living in Alaska on a glacier training sled dog teams. I think it would have been great to have something where I could have been like, hey, I fell in a crevasse, help me. um, because there were a few times where I was snowmobiling where it could have been an issue. But I mean, yes, we've had some interesting inbounds from like private security details of like oil executives. I mean, same thing, right? It's protecting an asset. I think too, we're starting to see some like more B2B inbounds of like remote workers, truckers, right? Like it's kind of similar. I think top 3 deaths or something of truckers is like falling asleep at the wheel, right? Like it does happen. So, it's kind of similar, when people go into an isolated or dangerous environment where it would be helpful to monitor, their health and location, like that's a very common mission need. That being said, like our focus is public safety and warfighters. Most of the sales team concentrates on public safety. I concentrate on the warfighter market. Because that's where you'll always make more money if you're selling something, if you have to focus, right? And we're a 9-person team, we do have to focus. You have to focus on like an enterprise level. right? Like selling onesies and twosies, hey, you could use this for hiking, you could use this for hiking, right? Like, yeah, there's a market there, but that's also more like, we would have to set up a server for them, and like there's a lot more steps that go into it. So if I could think about it as like a thought experiment of, if we sell one thing to one, hiker, whatever, to use the example, awesome. Um, but if we sell to an Air Force installation, right, and it's 200 people, we'll get more money out of a proportional amount of effort. That
Yeah,
answer your question?
it did. It did. So when you're trying to drum up new business within your different sectors, how do you do that? Where do you focus? I mean, let's get more tactical, I guess. Like, what are some of the channels that you use for outbound? You mentioned inbound. What do you use for inbound? What have you seen work? And what do you think are some of the challenges about staying, or what are some of the challenges that you have in engaging with your end decision maker customer?
Yeah. So on the inbound side, just go to our website, ascentitech.com. We get actually a surprising amount of leads from there. In particular, we are getting a lot of interest from international distributors, which is really cool. Like, we're working on, some stuff. Like, we've got with a big distributor in France, we've got some units, we've got a thing coming up with the Japanese self-defense force, through a distributor in Singapore, I believe. But yeah, we've had a lot of interest with that. And that's a really interesting play, because a lot of these distributors have been selling technology, right? It depends on, the vertical, right? Maybe it's guns and things are defense focused, or maybe it's, fire trucks and SCBA for public safety, or, whatever, body armor for cops. It doesn't matter. But they have a long experience, a trusted relationship with these people. Um, Whereas, like, so, hey, yeah, these like weird dudes from Chicago showed up with these watches, and like that is, like it's much easier to sell if you have like an ally, so to speak, right? If you have someone who's like, oh yeah, I trust this person, I've been buying widgets from them for 5-10 years. So we were getting a lot of inbounds from that. In terms of outbounds, a lot of conferences, a lot of, yeah, a lot of like when public safety or warfighters kind of congregate, right? Like, I was at a conference yesterday in DC, and I had my WearTech watch on, I had my phone running ATAC, and when people, because I have like TAC patches on my backpack, people would be like, "Oh, hey, TAC? Like, I love TAC. It's so cool." And I'm like, "Oh, well, have you ever considered wearables in TAC?" "Oh, no, I haven't." "Oh, sweet. Let me show you this." Like, whatever. It just works. A lot of the warfighter world, where, like I said, I really spend my time on biz dev. It's small. Obviously, it's I believe one of the largest international employer in government sector, right? The American Department of Defense. But the it's small in the sense that, like, because we're using proven hardware, we're pushing to proven software that they made, right? It's easier to get that warm intro. Hey, let me introduce you to the other, whatever, 10 most tack forward thinking, fire chiefs, or, security forces leaders, enterprise wide across the Air Force. So, often we find that it's best to go at the level of like their tactics, right? So, if, like, a month ago ish, I was here at Union Station in Chicago, which is like our big, transfer station for, the metro things coming from the suburb, and like the city trains and buses and blah blah blah. So, they were doing this training of, like, simulated. Here are good guys, here are bad guys. We put 3 watches on good guys, 3 watches on bad guys. Blue team, red team, and we labeled them, etc. And then, as they were kind of doing their training, they're walking through, and they're like, both indoors and outdoors. They're like, that's the hostile observation point. That's where, if this was, not a drill, right, that's where the bad guys would hang out and, kind of observe things, because it was like a government building too, and like it was a soft target. Right? Okay, sweet. And I'm just kind of, following. I drop a red diamond on my watch, which is the NATO 2525D symbology for like bad guy, basically hostile, right? So I drop that point. And then they're kind of walking through and like, okay, this is our rally point. Like, okay, sweet, drop blue rectangle, which is that same NATO symbol for a good guy, basically ally. And this is like this is kind of a choke point, right? And then we go inside Union Station, and they're like, okay, this breezeway where people kind of have to funnel through between like the sort of atrium area and like the like where all the trains are and the food court, etc. So it's like this narrow area where people have to funnel through. So if there was, something bad happened, that would be an obstacle. So I'm like, okay, sweet. Drop yellow quatrefoil, which is the NATO symbol for an obstacle. So, I do all this and there was, whatever, 10 more examples I don't need to go through, but you get the idea, right? If they're calling out humans, this is this, this is that. Blah, blah, blah. So I'm taking notes and I'm dropping all these points, and they're automatically pushing to ATAC because that's how we structured it. So then as he's through, he's like, yeah, does that all make sense, everyone? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I got it here. And then Declan, one of our sales team, who's awesome, he's with me. And he's got a tablet, right? Because I'm just using my S25. So it's a small screen. He's got his tablet. And I just lasso him and push the points to him. And I'm like, and now Declan has them too. Because, before they were like sketching and everything. And it's like, technology's evolved beyond a whiteboard and paper and pencil, showing them how we can change their tactics, how we can make their operations better, safer, faster. Reducing verbal comms is a huge value proposition, right? If you don't have to call on the radios, hey, where are you? If you can just look down at your map, your whatever, your tablet phone, wherever you're running, it doesn't really matter. If you can just look down and just reduce that verbal comms, it is a huge value add. That's where we find a lot of really good outreach efforts, right? Because then they'll tell people, they'll say, oh, hey, these guys did this amazing thing. Or, sometimes another department will be there, like, et cetera, right? So this was Chicago PD, this was Illinois State Police. There were other, departments from departments around that were there and just like, well, this is neat.
Yeah, hands-on live visual demonstrations essentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really smart. And events are the best way to do that. When you look at the public sector or public safety, is that still events, or do you do anything that's more of like the traditional email, LinkedIn messages to like, fire department chiefs or like leaders at the municipal level?
I mean, that ain't my book of business. I don't think we do. No, I think we are very much relying on word of mouth, etc. Even like the we do like cold call, but it's really more of a warm call of like, hey, your neighboring department is using this. How about you come see it? It's going to be far better than some, hey, let me send you a brochure. Let me send you a slick sheet or a quad chart.
Last question for you, Alex. When you're thinking about growth in the next 6 to 12 months, how are you thinking about that? Because people think about growth in different ways. They think about, bringing on new customers. They think about new product or feature releases. They might think about like funding rounds. How do you think about growth and how do you measure it? And where do you want to be within the next 6 to 12 months?
Great question. I think about growth as number of users. I think about growth and upcoming features. Like we've got some really cool ones that just came out within the past few days. For example, the watch face is WearTac. So you don't have to, open any other map, et cetera, or any other app, et cetera. And that's just came out, I don't know, the past 3 or 4 days or so. There's all kinds of benefits, right? Faster, bigger battery, just far easier to use, the biggest benefit. We've got some new features coming out that are really exciting, and those are all entirely driven by users. So we're working with a big NATO Memorial Day summit in Ohio. It's where I'm going to be next week. There's 206 NATO delegates coming. We're providing security. Well, we're not providing security. That's people much tougher than us. We are providing watches to go on the security and PD and et cetera to allow them greater situational awareness if something happens. And I really hope nothing happens because the Ohio Anti-Terrorism Task Force actually thinks it's pretty likely that there's something violent that's going to happen. But yeah, so they said, hey, could we do X? And it was the ability for a user to cancel a point they had dropped. And and I talked to them, and then I called him in 20, 30 minutes, and I was like, hey, yes, but I can have one thing done by Monday and one thing done by Thursday. And here are your two choices. Which do you value more? And he said, okay, great. Let me talk to our civilian partner force. right? Because it's a whole coordinated thing between the military and the civilian police. But he's like, let me talk to our partner force and see what they value. And then 20, 30 minutes later, he called me and he's like, yeah, we want like that's cool if you could do that. We value more battery life optimizations over the ability for user to cancel the point. So like, I can sit here and I can go, oh, we could do this, or we could do it at this point, but it's infinitely more valuable to me for an actual user to go, I'd like to do this, and here's where I rank it in terms of priority. I can rank the technical feasibility, how it impacts the architecture, et cetera, but I can't understand the mission use case. But yeah, growth for me, more users. Also pushing into more platforms. TAC is, I think I've waxed very poetic on TAC many times. This pack is for me by far and away my favorite map with dots on it to show good guys and bad guys. But fundamentally, there's a lot of others, right? Esri, Tablet Command, First Do, Adashi, right? These are all COPS, common operating pictures, things that are like, here's a map and here's where people or trucks, et cetera, are. Our Esri integration is done, and as is our Tablet Command integration. We're working now on Adashi and First Do, because in the similar way that we were trying to build our own hardware and software and we failed, a lot of civilian fire departments are already using COPS. The common operational picture software is already mapped with dots. They're already using these things, and we have to come to them at the level of, okay, so you already have a map. We're not going to replace your map. We're going to make your map more useful by providing the ability for a watch to connect to it.
Great. Fantastic. Well, Alex, if anyone wants to learn more about you or the technology or the company, how can they get in touch?
Go to our website, ascentitech.com. Go to my LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/AE Gorsuch. Yeah, either of those work.
Great. Well, I hope people reach out. It's been a pleasure having you today. It was really fun. And yeah, I hope people listen to this and reach out to you.
And me too. And I hope somebody learned something about focus on the job to be done. So
Me too.
thank you.
Thank you again.